Because I always let my emotions take over, I decided to see a therapist. The therapist glanced through my file, adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses slightly, and said, "It seems like you fall for people pretty easily." Without thinking, I replied, "What makes you say that, handsome?" In middle school, I had a crush on the rebellious bad boy in my class. In high school, I was smitten with the captain of the basketball team. In college, I fell hard for one of my classmates. Later, while gaming, I found myself infatuated with a streamer. And even at the salon, I couldn't help but swoon over the hairstylist. Basically, any profession has the potential to produce my dream guy. The worst part is, I'm a complete and utter love addict. Every relationship ends with me crying as if the world were ending, only for me to quickly be swept off my feet by the next person, diving headfirst into another romance. This habit of mine results in incredibly short relationship cycles, shockingly short, actually. Though my romantic experiences are countless, the longest relationship I've ever had barely lasted 3 months. It's as if I'm cursed by some mysterious 3-month breakup spell. Finally, I realized something might be wrong with me and mustered the courage to book an appointment with a therapist. But the moment I stepped into the consultation room, I froze. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, tall and poised, with gold-rimmed glasses framing his sharply defined features. His skin was pale, his nose was straight, and his fingers were long and elegant. Every single detail about him seemed custom-made to activate my crush radar. He nodded politely and said, "Please, have a seat." Sure, I sat down, my eyes practically sparkling as I watched him flip through the paperwork. The longer I looked, the more unfairly handsome he seemed. Unable to help myself, I started tracing circles on the table with my finger and cautiously asked, "What's your name, handsome?" His brow furrowed slightly, almost imperceptibly, before he calmly replied, "James Carter." Oh, I nodded vigorously. What a great name. Immediately, I began imagining what our future kids might look like. In my head, I thought, if they inherit even half of his genes, they'd be perfect. I'm Nora Harper, I introduced myself. I know, he said without even looking up. James, do you have a girlfriend? He paused his reading, looked up at me, and said, "No." We locked eyes for a few seconds, and my heart started racing. This had to be some kind of silent flirtation, right? But before I could say anything, he broke eye contact, calmly returning to his files, leaving me no chance to continue the conversation. 5 minutes later, he adjusted his glasses again and spoke in a measured tone, "You do seem to fall for people quite easily." Without thinking, I blurted out, "What makes you say that? Handsome?" He visibly hesitated, as if caught off guard, before continuing, "How long has this been going on?" I stared dreamily at his face and replied, about a month, I guess." "I mean," he clarified, his tone turning more serious, "how long have you had this tendency to fall for people so easily? Also, don't forget why you're here to work on resolving these issues." "Oh." I quickly straightened up and responded earnestly, "Well, it probably started back in elementary school. There was this boy in my class who used to pull my hair and tease me all the time for the next hour." I clutched a box of tissues as I recounted my romantic escapades, from the bad boy I liked in elementary school, to the basketball captain in high school, to the streamers and hairstylists who left me utterly infatuated. The more I talked, the more ridiculous my romantic history seemed. And I couldn't help but cry uncontrollably. "James, do you think I'm just destined to be unhappy in love?" I sobbed. He was silent for a few seconds, his face showing that familiar look of exasperation. Then he let out a deep sigh and asked, "How's your relationship with your father?" "My father is alive and well," I responded reflexively. "I mean, how's your relationship with him?" "It's distant." "Distant?" "Yes. He's a businessman. He spends the whole year traveling all over the country. I see the security guard in my building more often than I see him. This week's task is to talk to your father more. In person, if possible, or via video call. Ideally, try to talk for about an hour every 2 days. That's it? I asked, eyes wide. No medication or anything? You don't need medication, he said as he stood up and glanced at his watch. That's it for today. If there's nothing else, I'll see you next week. I stood up quickly, sensing it was time to leave. James, can I have your personal number? You know, just in case I need to contact you. Without looking up, he replied. The office number will suffice. His cool and detached demeanor only made me like him even more. I left the clinic and returned to school. As soon as I entered the dorm, my roommates were already waiting for me. How was it? Is this therapist any good? Did the session help? Did he say anything profound that made you see the light? I thought for a moment before replying, he's really handsome. A few pairs of disappointed eyes stared at me, full of disapproval. You didn't, one of them began. Hee, I laughed awkwardly. You don't understand. He's so handsome. Like, impossibly handsome. She's hopeless, one said with a sigh. We told you, never let her see a therapist under 50, another added. With her taste, even someone over 50 isn't safe. Just wait till Jessica gets back. You're definitely getting a lecture. I swallowed nervously and muttered. It's fine. She won't be back until Monday. Jessica is my best friend and the head of our dorm. She was the one who recommended this therapist, offering me free counseling sessions. If she found out I wasn't solving my psychological issues, but was instead trying to charm the therapist, I could already picture her losing her mind. Monday, midday. Jessica was busy. So I went to lunch alone. I had barely walked a few steps when a voice called out from behind me. Nora. I stopped in the crowded hallway and turned around. Why are you walking so fast, babe? A tall guy stood in front of me. Seriously? Of course I was walking fast. I was trying to avoid running into Jessica and getting scolded. What do you want? I asked, not even trying to hide my irritation. Nora. I've thought about it a lot. Let's get back together, he said, looking at me with what he probably thought was heartfelt sincerity. I'm willing to help you break that 3-month breakup curse. I stared at him, resisting the urge to spit in his face. This guy was my ex-boyfriend. A month ago, I met him at the guitar club. He was the club president. I fell for him at first sight, pursued him like crazy, and got him to agree to date me in just 2 days. When my roommates saw his photo, their brows furrowed so tightly they almost formed a knot. I awkwardly tried to explain, he just isn't photogenic. He's actually pretty good looking in person. To me, being tall was all that mattered, looks weren't a priority. Later, my roommates helped me dig up some dirt on him. They found out he had cheated on several of his ex-girlfriends. When I confronted him, he looked me in the eye, deadly serious, and said, "That's all in the past. I've told you, you're special. You'll be the last girlfriend I ever have." I fell for his sweet lies. But 2 weeks later, I caught him red-handed, flirting with another girl in a grove near campus. I stormed over and slapped him hard across the face. Can't you at least have some decency? If you were sneaking off to a hotel, I might have respected you a little more. When my roommates heard about it later, they all clapped and cheered for me. But my defiance only lasted a day. That same night, after the lights were out, I called him while crying silently under my blanket, telling him that if he was willing to get back together, I'd forgive him. Maybe it was the slap that stunned him, or maybe he already had a new girlfriend, but he turned me down. I couldn't let my roommates know, so I cried quietly under the covers for 2 days. A week later, it was like a switch flipped in my head, and I completely got over it. From that day forward, every time I saw his face, I felt nothing but disgust. That's just how I am when my love-struck brain kicks in. It's like I've been bewitched, seeing nothing but the other person's good qualities. But once the spell is broken, it's as if I've woken up to realize I'd fallen for a pig. And yet, here this pig was again, standing right in front of me. "Nora, don't be like this," he said, trying to look sincere. "I've thought about it carefully. Even though your moods are unpredictable, I still think you're the one for me." I waved my hand dismissively and replied without hesitation, "I'm not the one for you. Go find someone else who's just as unlucky as you are." He sighed, then pulled out a small gift box and handed it to me. "Nora, look. I got you something." I took the box and opened it to find a necklace. It was the same one we'd seen while shopping before, priced at $200. I'd really liked it at the time and was about to buy it when he stopped me. $200? That's enough for a meal. Don't waste money, Head said. So, I didn't buy the necklace. Instead, I ended up treating him to dinner. Now, I stared at his face, which was trying to look apologetic. And the more I looked, the angrier I got. What on earth was I thinking back then, falling for this nonsense? I wanted to slap myself. I don't want it. I turned my head away coldly, only to catch a glimpse of a familiar figure in the distance. James. I left the scumbag behind and hurriedly weaved through the crowd to catch up, grabbing James by the hem of his coat. "James, why haven't you been answering my calls?" I asked, looking at him with a hint of grievance. He blinked, startled. "I've been out of town the past few days." "And being out of town means you can't answer your office phone? Or is it because you've already found yourself a girlfriend in the last 2 days? What does it matter to you if he has a girlfriend?" A crisp female voice interrupted us. That's when I noticed the petite girl standing beside James. She stepped forward, placing herself between me and James, her hands on her hips, her sharp eyes practically stabbing into me. I felt my legs go weak and forced out an awkward laugh. "Haha, Jessica, I thought you weren't coming back today." "Great." Caught in the act. Jessica crossed her arms, shook her head, and sighed. "Nora. You're something else. You even have the nerve to go after my cousin." I felt a wave of relief and quickly forced a laugh. "You scared me. I thought he was your boyfriend." "Oh, good, he's your cousin. Perfect, let's keep it in the family." Jessica glared at me fiercely. "Keep it in the family, my ass. I sent you to a therapist to work on your issues, not to find yourself a date." I pouted, not daring to say another word. James, who had been silently watching the scene unfold, unexpectedly stepped in to defend me. "Don't blame her," he said. "Nora does have some issues. She's still learning how to navigate relationships with men. Give her some time." It was such a simple statement, but I felt like I was swimming in honey. He called me Nora. His tone was so gentle. So sweet. Jessica shook her head, her expression still stern. "Until you have the ability and emotional maturity to handle a healthy relationship, I will never let you mess with my cousin. Even if you're my best friend, I won't allow it." "Oh," I muttered, lowering my head in disappointment. If I could never change, was I destined to be alone forever? James' gaze moved past me and landed on something behind me. "I also think you should take a break from dating for now," he said. "Nora, who is this guy? What gives him the right to butt into your business?" The scumbag's voice came from behind me. "I'm her therapist," James said curtly, his tone carrying a hint of irritation. "What do you need a therapist for? You've got me." The scumbag walked over and tried to put his arm around my shoulder. I frowned and quickly dodged. He let out a dramatic sigh, clearly trying to appear earnest. "Nora. I know you're starved for love. You don't need a therapist. Trust me, I can give you all the security you need." I couldn't help but shoot him a disdainful look. "Sorry, but I'm not a recycling bin. Don't come looking for me again." The scumbag opened his mouth to say more, but Jessica grabbed my hand. "Nora, want to grab something to eat?" "Sure," I said, taking the chance to walk away with her. Once we were out of earshot. Jessica glanced at me and said casually, "You really do have a habit of picking boyfriends out of the trash." James looked down at me, his tone neutral. At least she's starting to recognize that. It's progress. Jessica shrugged. It's only a matter of time before her love-struck brain kicks in again. When that happens, you could probably convince her to move to the middle of nowhere. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't muster the confidence. After lunch, James went home. I couldn't wait to ask Jessica, "I thought you said he was just a therapist?" My cousin studied psychology. He's doing research on related topics, and you needed therapy, so I thought I'd recommend him to you, Jessica explained with a shrug. I stared at her. What? Why are you looking at me like that? You didn't lose anything, did you? She said. That's true. I admitted. But your cousin is so handsome. Shouldn't he stay in the family? Jessica suddenly stopped walking. She turned to me with a serious look on her face. Nora Harper, you may be my best friend, but I don't want you wasting your warmth on scumbags anymore. You deserve a healthy, fulfilling relationship. This time, can you please get yourself together and actually work on your issues? I know, I mumbled, lowering my head as I climbed the stairs. Jessica meant well. I knew that. But I didn't know how to respond. On paper, I wasn't lacking in any way. But every boyfriend I'd ever had was average-looking, with mediocre family backgrounds and education. My friends had seen it all, how I allowed these scumbags to gradually chip away at my confidence, how they cheated on me. And even how some of them tricked me into handing over my monthly allowance. What's worse, I let them do it willingly. Just like my name suggests, I always offered them my warmth. Still, I had my limits. My friends believed I was salvageable and encouraged me to see a therapist. I knew I needed to gain control of myself, and I was willing to cooperate with the treatment. With that thought, I pulled out my phone and dialed my dad's number for a voice call. The phone rang for so long that I was about to hang up when he finally answered. Need money? He asked, cutting straight to the point. I'll transfer it to you in a bit. No, I stammered, unsure of how to start the conversation. My relationship with my dad was complicated. He should have been the closest person to me. Yet I felt distant and estranged from him. From as far back as I could remember, since I was in preschool, had been traveling around the world for work. During holidays, he was even busier than usual, and his trips home were random and unpredictable. Over time, I got used to the absence of a father figure in my life. Is everything okay at home? He suddenly asked, sounding concerned. No, nothing's wrong, I quickly replied, afraid he'd worry. Then, fumbling for a topic, I asked, Dad, are you busy lately? In truth, I was hoping he'd say, I'm too busy to talk, so I could end this awkward call. Not really. Just tell me what's on your mind, he replied, sounding a bit impatient. I just wanted to ask how you've been doing, I said. Oh. He went silent on the other end. He seemed as caught off guard by my sudden interest in his life as I was by his question. Things have been fine, he finally said. I've been busy with meetings. We just launched a new company, and there's a lot to handle. I probably won't be able to come home anytime soon. I see. I drew out the words, still racking my brain for something to say. What about you? He asked, breaking the silence. Have you found an internship yet? Not yet. I quickly filled him in on my current situation. The call lasted only 3 minutes. But it left me feeling an unfamiliar sense of relief. The therapist's advice seemed to be working. Still, by the end of the week, that was the only call I made to him. Over the weekend, I went to James' house as scheduled. This time, he was dressed in a gray tracksuit. The fitted design highlighted his perfect physique, and the sunlight streaming through the window illuminated his face, making his deep brown eyes look even more striking. One glance, and my heart was already racing. I had no choice but to lower my head, avoiding his gaze altogether. He sat casually on the sofa and asked, "Did you do what I suggested?" I held up one finger. "I only called once. We barely talk all year as it is. Once a week is already my limit." He chuckled softly. "That's fine. We can take it slow. Does this week involve any test questions?" I asked, sitting up a bit straighter. "No tests," he said, twirling a pen lazily between his fingers. "Well, just talk." "Talk about what?" I quickly adjusted my posture, trying to look attentive. "Don't be nervous," he said with a faint smile. "Let's just go over your recent romantic experiences." "Didn't we already cover that last time?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not detailed enough." "Oh." I sighed and began to recall. In college, I had 3 relationships. I started. The first was with a local gaming streamer. At first, all I wanted was to win games and improve my skills. But he had a great voice, incredible gaming skills, and most importantly, he was really good at making people feel happy, probably because of his job. I gradually started enjoying playing games with him more and more. Eventually, I couldn't stand the idea of other girls getting the same attention from him that I did. When I realized how I was feeling, I decided to confess my feelings directly. He said, "I like you too, but I need to make money." So, I started spending all my allowance on him every month. I bought him game skins, gifts, anything to make him happy. 2 months later, he finally agreed to date me. And we planned to meet in person. But our first date was a bit of a letdown. He was a little overweight. But at least he was tall, patient, and caring. I quickly overlooked his flaws. He told me his family was struggling financially, so he hadn't been able to continue his education. He said he needed money to support his family. So, on our first date, I even insisted on paying the bill. However, after we started dating, he didn't stop playing games with other girls. I often found records of him playing with other female players on his account. Sometimes, I'd even see messages with nicknames like Baby or Honey in the chat. Whenever I confronted him about it, he'd brush me off with, "It's for work." I kept cutting back on my own expenses, hoping that if I supported him enough financially, he'd stop his so-called work. But none of my efforts changed anything. The real turning point came when I accidentally discovered his call history. He'd been calling the same girl regularly, for years. Trusting my instincts, I dialed the number. The person who answered had a soft, gentle voice. It didn't take long before I learned the truth. She was his girlfriend, and they had been together for 2 years. As for me, I wasn't even a mistress. I was just a complete fool. His sob story about his poor family? All lies. He wasn't broke, he was just too lazy to work and wanted someone to support him. When I found out the truth, I cried under my blanket for 2 days. Then, I spent a little money to have his gaming account permanently banned. Later, even his official girlfriend couldn't take it anymore and broke up with him for good. And yet, to this day, he still occasionally calls me, crying and begging to get back together. That was my first relationship in college. I stared down at my toes, feeling utterly embarrassed by my own stupidity. James quietly listened to my story and then asked, "What did you like about him?" "Probably that he was always there for me. He was attentive and made me feel important," I admitted. James nodded. "Go on." I took a deep breath and continued. "This is even more embarrassing. My second boyfriend in college was a hairstylist at a high-end salon. He was the owner, and he always insisted on personally doing my hair. He was in his mid to late 20s, fairly pale, and had a charming sense of humor that always made me laugh. He also made me feel like I was special to him. Maybe because I didn't interact with guys much. Even accidental physical contact with him would make my heart race. Apparently, he noticed it too, and started chatting with me on WhatsApp. From frequent chatting to officially dating, it only took about 7 days. In the beginning, he treated me with utmost care. He was gentle and attentive, driving me to different places every weekend to explore, try delicious food, and enjoy beautiful sights. But the honeymoon phase didn't last long. He slowly started to change. During our dates, he would make playful but critical comments about my appearance, even my personality. "Your waist is a bit thick. Stop wearing loose clothes. Why didn't you put on makeup today? You look so dull. You get mad so easily. With your personality, I'm the only one who could tolerate you." His controlling behavior kept escalating. If I kept doing things my way, he would either give me the silent treatment or compare me to others. Gradually, I started following his instructions. I threw away all the clothes he didn't like and made sure to put on makeup every time I went out. If I didn't have time to do my makeup, I'd wear a hat and sunglasses to cover myself up completely. The scariest part was that I started to subconsciously believe what he said, that I was ugly without makeup. I even forced myself to suppress my temper because he told me, only gentle and obedient women deserve to be loved. But none of this was enough for him. He began demanding that I delete all my male contacts, got jealous constantly, and would yell and scream at me. To avoid arguments, I always gave in and did what he wanted. The final straw that led to our breakup was when he saw me walking alongside a male classmate. It was an insignificant incident, but that day, he made a huge scene in public, shouting, smashing things, and even verbally abusing me in the street. He called me shameless, accused me of cheating, and turned the whole thing into a dramatic spectacle. I was terrified by his extreme behavior and immediately broke up with him. I rubbed my nose, feeling a bit embarrassed. Even now, I take a detour to avoid walking past that salon. James frowned slightly as he looked at me, then said in a cold tone, "Good. At least you know to steer clear of danger." I wasn't sure how to respond to his comment. "And did you like him because he could give you a sense of companionship too?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment. "Pretty much." "Go on." "That's it." I shrugged. "You've already seen my last relationship, and Jessica's probably told you about it too." James stared at me, the pen in his fingers turning slowly. His voice was low and firm. "It seems like you were drawn to these people because they provided you with temporary emotional validation. You saw a bright spot in them and projected your idealized image onto them, but that wasn't who they really were. In reality, you didn't truly understand their character or personality. Nora, that's not how you choose a partner, and it's definitely not love." I nodded. "Yeah, I get it now. The problem is, you struggle to set boundaries in your relationships with men. You unconsciously seek their attention and crave their companionship. These behaviors are closely tied to the lack of your father's presence during your childhood. I want you to keep working on this, and ideally, build a healthy relationship with your father." As he spoke, James scribbled a few numbers onto a blank piece of paper and handed it to me. "This is it for today. Hey, erase my cell phone number. If you encounter something you truly can't handle, you can call me." Feigning defiance, I replied, "Didn't you say the office number would suffice?" He reached out and took the paper back. "Then use the office number. Your cell phone is more convenient." I muttered as I snatched the paper from his hand and dashed out of his sight before he could say anything else. Over the next few weeks, James became incredibly busy managing his father's subsidiary company. I only got to see him occasionally, when I reported on my progress and followed his advice for therapy. My calls with my dad also stabilized at about once a week. Although infrequent, the conversations became longer each time. One day, my dad found out I hadn't secured an internship yet. He reached out to a friend's company and arranged one for me. When I announced in the dorm group chat that I would be interning at this company, Jessica immediately replied with 3 big exclamation marks, "That's my cousin's company." "Nora, I thought you'd gotten over this, but you just can't change, can you?" I was completely stunned and hurriedly replied, "My dad arranged it." How was I supposed to know it was his company? Jessica wasn't buying it. Nope, I'm telling my cousin to keep an eye on you. I rolled my eyes. 5 minutes later, Jessica shared a screenshot in the group chat. Jessica, hey, Nora is coming to intern at your company. James, haven't seen her in a while. Jessica, you're not missing her, are you? Did she actually win you over? James, don't worry about it. The chat instantly exploded with a stream of question marks. As for me? I was completely dumbfounded. I'd been doing my best to keep my feelings in check, but James' vague reply felt undeniably suggestive. Before I could dive into a heated discussion with my roommates about the implications of James' words, my phone suddenly rang. Nora, it's been a while. I immediately recognized the voice. It was Tony, the hairstylist. To cut ties with him completely, I had even changed my phone number. But how on earth did he get my new one? Hello. What do you want? I said, trying to sound as distant and cold as possible. I miss you, he said, his tone serious, but laced with the faint slur of alcohol. During our 2 months together, he had never lowered himself like this. He was clearly drunk. I want to see you, he continued. It's late, and we've broken up. I replied. I never agreed to the breakup. He sounded hurt. You suddenly deleted my contact without giving me any explanation. If we're breaking up, at least let's have a proper goodbye. I responded coldly, I'm not meeting you. Then tomorrow, he pressed. Let's talk properly. If you still want to break up, I'll respect your decision and won't bother you again. There's no need, I said icily. I hung up the phone without hesitation. After that, I lost all interest in discussing anything else and quickly went to bed. The first day of my internship, I arrived at the company early, hoping to make a good impression. James, on the other hand, arrived just on time. He glanced at me briefly before starting the morning meeting. Dressed in a meticulously tailored dark gray suit, with his familiar gold-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. He looked impossibly handsome as he worked with focus and precision. I couldn't take my eyes off his long, slender fingers. My thoughts drifted back to the first time I visited his house, and then to the screenshot Jessica had sent last night. When I snapped back to reality, I realized I had unknowingly started smiling. Nora Harper. His voice suddenly brought me back to the present. I jerked upright, startled. Yes? Day 1. And you're already daydreaming? I hadn't even noticed him walk up to me. He raised his hand and gently tapped my forehead. Come with me. It was only then that I realized the meeting had already ended, and everyone else had left the room. I quickly stood up and followed him obediently. James led me straight into his office. I happen to need a secretary. You can fill in for now. I hesitated, speaking timidly. But you're still my therapist. Isn't this a little inappropriate? It wasn't that I didn't want to accept the offer, it was just that the proposition felt too tempting to be true. He glanced at me, his expression calm. What's the problem? Well, I gestured at myself. Falling for my doctor, then falling for my boss. It feels like fate is really testing me. You're both my therapist and my boss. Someone'll be around 247. This is too much of a challenge for me. James chuckled softly, his gaze carrying a hint of teasing. Then I'll resign and stop being your therapist. But what about my psychological issues? You don't really need me anymore, he said casually. In these past few months, you haven't developed feelings for anyone else, have you? His deep, meaningful gaze made my heart race. I don't think so. Unless you count you. I thought to myself. That's good. He nodded. You'll just need to handle my schedule and some daily tasks. It's all within your capabilities. Got it, James. I agreed readily. Getting to work with such a handsome man every day, with such simple responsibilities, this was practically my dream job. I was in a great mood all morning. That is, Until the peace was disrupted in the afternoon by an unexpected visitor, Cindy Snow. She walked in wearing a tight red dress and sky-high heels, her makeup striking and meticulously done. When she saw me, her expression registered clear surprise. Nora Harper? Jessica and I had been best friends from middle school through college, but Cindy was different. She was in the same year as us. But we weren't particularly close. I had always known Jessica had a cousin, but my impression of him was vague. As for Cindy, she once mentioned to me that she was pursuing Jessica's cousin, James, and that she was this close to winning him over. After high school, Cindy went to a vocational college. And we lost touch. I hadn't paid much attention to how things developed between her and James. But never in my wildest dreams did I expect them to still be in contact now. What a coincidence, Cindy. I tried my best to suppress the strange bitterness in my chest and forced a smile. She raised an eyebrow, her tone laced with curiosity. You're working here now? No, I'm just interning, I replied. Oh. James is something else. He told me the company was full, yet he still managed to find a spot for you. She cast me a displeased look. Where is he? I need to see him. Actually, my dad knows James' father, so I tried to explain. Save it. I just want to see James, she interrupted. Okay. I quietly took out my phone and called James. After hanging up, I told Cindy. He won't be back for a while. Then I'll wait. She clicked her heels across the floor and plopped onto the sofa. I considered using the opportunity to catch up with her, but ever since she found out I was interning here, her expression had been sour, and she clearly didn't want to talk. Fine. Let her sit there if she wants to. It's none of my business. James never came back, not even by the end of the day. Cindy was still there, waiting impatiently, while I clocked out right on time. Not leaving work on time just isn't my style. As I stepped out of the building, ready to hail a cab, a BMW suddenly pulled up in front of me. The window rolled down, revealing a face I hadn't expected to see. Shane, my ex-boyfriend. We need to talk, Nora, he said. Hearing his voice sent a shiver down my spine. Who told you I was here? Showing up out of nowhere like this is really creepy. You know? I reached out to some of your old classmates, he replied calmly. I don't mean anything bad. I just want to clear the air. I've already made a reservation at the restaurant you like. I stared at him for a long moment, knowing he wasn't going to let me go easily. Fine. I'll take a cab and meet you there. Wait for me. At least the restaurant was a public place. I figured I could meet him, say my piece, and leave. It shouldn't be too risky. Okay. I'll wait for you, he said, then drove off without further argument. I called a cab to the restaurant, and just in case, I texted Jessica to let her know the location and asked her to stay in touch. When I arrived, Shane was already waiting for me. Reluctantly, I followed him inside. The restaurant was dimly lit, with flickering candles casting soft glows. As usual, Shane was trying to play the gentleman, pulling out a chair for me and ordering food that matched my preferences. But all I felt toward him now was disgust and fear. After all, I had never dealt with someone whose emotions were as unstable as his. Nora, I want to apologize for my overreaction before, he said, reaching out to hold my hand. But it was only because I love you so much. I quickly pulled my hand away. It's not just about that one day. Even when we were together, I constantly felt suffocated. You always tore down my confidence and made me feel like I wasn't good enough. But I believe a healthy relationship shouldn't feel like that. We're just not right for each other. The words came from James' analysis. And now I realized just how much they resonated. But I was jealous, because I cared about you. I was afraid of losing you, Shane said, taking a deep breath. The feedback I gave you was meant to help you grow and improve. He paused before continuing. Lately, I've tried dating some amazing women. They were great, but I still prefer the feeling of growing together with you. Oh. So he was trying to brainwash me again. I curled my lip. I don't like you. You should find someone who's okay with being controlled by you, instead of trying to change me. Shane stared at me for a few seconds, his expression unreadable, his gaze so intense it made me uneasy. After a long pause, he finally nodded. Fine, I'll respect your decision. Let's just consider this meal our farewell dinner. As soon as he finished speaking, I caught sight of James and Cindy walking into the restaurant from the corner of my eye. They entered one after the other and sat down not far from us. James' gaze swept across the room and landed directly on me. Feeling a bit flustered, I gave him a small nod. Cindy turned her head to glance at me, then immediately began speaking to James excitedly. Shane noticed where I was looking and turned around. Is that your therapist? How do you know I have a therapist? Shane let out a cold laugh. Your ex-boyfriend told me. You've been talking to him? Well, since you've moved on to someone else, I figured I should do a little background check for you. His tone was calm, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. Never mind. Forget it. Let's finish our meal. I glared at him angrily. I'm going to the restroom. I was too furious. I needed to cool down. In the dimly lit restroom, I pulled out my phone and saw several unread messages, all from Jessica. Are you kidding me? You're talking to him again? You've got nerves of steel. I told my cousin about it. He said he's on his way. Is he there yet? I quickly replied. He's here. He came with Cindy. Jessica immediately responded, Cindy? Why does she keep showing up like a ghost? I brushed it off with, I'll tell you later, and turned off my screen. When I stepped out of the restroom, the dim hallway stretched before me. A tall figure suddenly blocked my path. I looked up and saw James. He gazed down at me with his deep, penetrating eyes. Are you waiting for Cindy? I asked hesitantly. No. She's gone. He tapped my forehead lightly with his knuckle, then leaned in closer, his voice low and magnetic. Nora Harper, do you want to be with me? What? His sudden question left me completely stunned. Is it because you saw me with my ex? Are you jealous and finally realized you like me too? No. He shook his head slightly, a faint smirk playing on his lips. It's because you're too foolish. What? Did you know that less than a minute after you left the table, your ex spiked your drink? What the? My eyes widened in shock. I quickly pulled out my phone. I need to call the police. James reached out and stopped my hand, his voice steady. Already done. Oh, so what should I do now? Go back and keep him distracted? My mind was racing, overwhelmed by the information. Just stay here and don't move. He patted my head and turned to leave with long, purposeful strides. Seconds later, the restaurant erupted into chaos, screams from a woman, Shane's curses, the sound of fists landing and chairs being knocked over. The whole place was in turmoil. Not long after, the police arrived at the restaurant. James, Shane, and I were all taken to the station to give statements. It turned out that after I cut ties with Shane, he started dating a few other women. But none of them were as obedient as I had been. One day, by chance, he saw me walking with my ex-boyfriend and felt deeply unsettled. So, he deliberately befriended my ex, trying to get information about me. Apparently, my ex, full of bravado, claimed he had dumped me, said I'd been heartbroken ever since, and even mentioned I was seeing a therapist. Shane saw an opportunity and decided to swoop in. But to his dismay, I completely ignored him. That's when he came up with the twisted idea of forcing me to meet him in a way I couldn't refuse. Thankfully, James was there for me. By the time we left the police station, it was already early morning. The late autumn night carried a distinct chill, with the cold seeping into the air. James drove me home. The moonlight spilled across his face, making his pale skin seem even fairer. His dark eyes focused steadily on the road ahead. I hesitated before breaking the silence. Earlier, were you confessing your feelings to me? He glanced at me briefly, his tone calm. Yes. I had planned to wait until you gradually fell in love with me, but after what happened tonight, I don't want to wait another minute. What? I was a bit taken aback. Haven't I already liked you for a while? You call that liking me? That's just being attracted to my looks. Why can't it be love at first sight? I retorted. We went to the same high school. I'm Jessica's cousin. We've met countless times, but you could never remember my name. Really? I racked my brain for any memory of him and finally found an excuse. You've changed so much. And we barely interacted back then. It's normal that I didn't have a deep impression of you. Maybe it's because I was always behind you, and you never turned around to notice me. His voice was low, his gaze fixed on something far away. In middle school, you liked the bad boy in class, while I was sitting at the front, focused on my studies. In high school, you liked the basketball players, so I started training day and night. I finally got abs. But by then, you had fallen for a gaming streamer. When I got good at gaming, you had moved on to Tony, the hairstylist. I couldn't exactly learn hairstyling, so I went abroad instead. He paused for a moment, a faint smile tugging at his lips. When I came back, I finally caught up with you. You liked therapists, so I became one. You liked workplace superiors, so I took over the company. At a green light, James pulled the car over to the curb and turned to look at me. He rested his arm on the back of my seat, leaning slightly toward me until our faces were just inches apart. Nora Harper, he said softly, I've been invisible in your world for so many years, chasing after you for so long. This time, can you stop and notice me? His face drew closer. The familiar scent of cedarwood filling the space between us. Then came the warmth of his lips, pressing gently against mine. The honk of a car horn behind us snapped me out of my daze. In truth, he could have said yes to me the first time I was infatuated with him. But he didn't. I stared out at the rapidly disappearing city lights through the car window. After a long silence, I whispered, James. Let's take it slow, okay? He chuckled softly and nodded. Okay. Taking things slow is the most sincere promise I can give you. When I got home, I hugged my teddy bear tightly, still feeling a bit lightheaded. My phone buzzed with simultaneous messages from Jessica and James. Are you home? Did you get home safely? Yes, I'm home, I replied to both of them before curling up with my teddy bear. Lost in thought. Fragmented memories from the past began to come into focus. In middle school, I had a crush on the rebellious boy who always sat in the back of the classroom. Whenever he got punished and had to stand in the hallway, I would find ways to get myself sent out too, just to be near him. In the neighboring classroom, there was always a pale-skinned boy sitting in the front row, sneaking glances at me from time to time. In high school, I was infatuated with the basketball players. Every day after school, I'd carry a bottle of water and head to the basketball court to watch them shoot hoops and run drills, drenched in sweat. Out of my line of sight, there was always a figure jogging lap after lap around the court. In college, I became obsessed with gaming companions. One night, while Jessica and I were pulling an all-nighter playing games, she casually complained, "Oh my God, it's 3 a.m., and my cousin is still gaming. Look at his stats, they're terrible." It turned out that while I was chasing fleeting moments of affection and companionship, there was someone silently working hard, inching closer to me all along. Just as my nose tingled and my eyes began to mist, a message from James popped up. "I'll pick you up tomorrow. Go to bed early. Good night." "Good night," I replied, feeling the sweetness overflow in my heart. With a bounce in my step, I headed back to my bedroom. I was just about to climb into bed when I heard the soft click of the doorknob turning. At this hour, my mom should already be asleep. Barefoot, I rushed to check and found a familiar figure standing there. Looking a little travel-worn, it was my dad. Why are you running around barefoot? Do you want to catch a cold? He frowned, his tone unusually caring. It was the first time I'd heard him say something like this directly. Normally, he would tell my mom, who would pass the message on to me. Oh, I forgot, I mumbled as I hurried back to grab my slippers. Dad, why are you back so late at night? It's Christmas. The company's on break. So I rushed home. I later learned that the real reason he came back was because I had been calling him so often lately. He thought I might be missing him and made time to come home just to be with me. Growing up, I always knew my dad was busy, so busy that I felt I shouldn't bother him unless it was something really important. But these past few weeks, I realized that no matter how busy he was, he could still make time to listen to the trivial details of my life. It turned out that no matter what, I was always in his thoughts. The vague and distant image of a father I'd held in my memory for so long finally started to come into focus. The next few days, I was in an exceptionally good mood. Maybe it was because my dad was home. Or maybe it was because of James. The only thing that made me a little uneasy was Cindy still coming back to look for James. Even though James refused to see her every time, I couldn't help but feel annoyed. I tried to act mature and kept my feelings to myself. And I managed to hold it in from autumn all the way into winter. That evening, snowflakes floated down softly outside the glass window. Look, it's snowing, James said, pointing outside. But this time I couldn't hold it in any longer. What's your relationship with Cindy? Why does she keep coming to you? The words tumbled out before I could stop myself, my tone betraying my emotions. James paused, seemingly caught off guard, then chuckled. How long have you been holding on to that question? For ages. Just tell me already. I blurted out, completely unconcerned about my lack of composure. In high school, Cindy found out I liked you. James leaned back in his chair, his expression calm. She approached me and said she could help deliver a love letter to you. A love letter? I frowned. But I never got one. Exactly. James nodded. I found out later she never gave it to you. But she wouldn't admit it. Instead, she insisted you rejected me. Fragments of high school memories surfaced in my mind. I remembered Cindy seriously asking me once if I knew Jessica's cousin. Turns out, she liked James even back then. She's been coming to me recently because she has a younger brother and wanted me to help him get a job. She even brought up the whole love letter incident, saying I owed her for that. And? I asked curiously. I said no. James shrugged. She does have a brother. From what I understand, she gave up a lot of opportunities back then to take care of him. Yes, I remember she sacrificed quite a bit for her brother at the time. Exactly. That's why I want help her. His tone was calm but firm. What she needs is to face reality, not rely on others. Then why did you take her to the restaurant? I pressed, refusing to let the topic slide. When Jessica told me you were meeting your ex, I had just returned to the office, and Cindy happened to see me. She kept following me, and I didn't want to waste time arguing with her, so I didn't send her away. Hearing this explanation, I finally felt at ease. That's more like it. He suddenly reached out and lightly touched the back of my hand. I looked up at him. If you ever have questions, just ask me. Don't bottle them up, he said softly, his voice low and gentle. That's the only way you'll truly get to know me. Okay. I slowly slipped my hand into his, our fingers intertwining. Time stretches endlessly ahead, the days and years unfolding. I have a lifetime to truly get to know you.